66 million years ago, on an ordinary spring morning in what would one day be called the Cretaceous period, a rock the size of a mountain was hurtling toward Earth at 20 kilometers per second. It had traveled for millions of years through the cold silence of space. Its trajectory was shaped by an almost infinite chain of gravitational interactions, the pull of Jupiter, the nudge of passing comets, the slow wobble of its own spin. None of that history mattered anymore, because what mattered was that in approximately 4 hours, this 10-kilometer sphere of carbonite and iron would strike the shallow seas of what we now call the Yucatan Peninsula, and it would change everything. The impact released the energy of 100 million nuclear weapons. It vaporized billions of tons of rock, sulfur, and seawater, launching a cloud of debris into the stratosphere that would circle the globe within hours. Wildfires swept across continents. Tsunamis hundreds of meters high crashed against coastlines thousands of kilometers from the impact site. And then came the darkness. A year-long twilight, as the sun vanished behind a shroud of dust and sulfur aerosols, dropping global temperatures by nearly 30 degrees Celsius. The plants died first, unable to photosynthesize, then the herbivores that depended on them, then the predators that depended on the herbivores within a geological instant. 3/4 of all species on Earth were gone, including every dinosaur larger than a house cat. That is what happened. That is the history written in stone, in the thin layer of iridium-rich clay that marks the boundary between the Mesozoic and Cenozoic eras, in the 200-kilometer scar buried beneath the sediments of the Yucatan. For decades, this apocalyptic narrative has been the undisputed truth. The rock fell from the heavens, the world burned, the skies darkened, and the glorious reign of the ruling reptiles was violently, instantly terminated. But before we delve deeper into the layers of sediment that hide the true story, I want to take a brief moment to introduce myself to those who might be new to our journey through deep time. I am Frank, the archaeologist, and I have dedicated my life to unearthing the subtle, often overlooked whispers of the ancient world, translating the silent language of stone and bone into stories that bridge the vast chasms of history. I recently noticed something quite surprising. Exactly 71.9% of the people who watch these deep dives into our planet's past are not yet subscribed to the channel. If you find yourself captivated by the mysteries of deep time, please consider subscribing. It helps immensely, and it allows us to continue bringing these forgotten eras back to life, peeling back the layers of our world to reveal the astonishing truths hidden beneath. Now, let us return to the darkness of the ash cloud and to the scientific revelations that are currently shattering everything we thought we knew about the end of the Cretaceous world. The discovery that an asteroid killed the dinosaurs is itself a remarkable story, and it is worth telling because it beautifully illustrates how science works, how a radical idea, dismissed at first as fantasy, can become accepted fact when the evidence accumulates. In 1980, a physicist named Luis Alvarez and his geologist son Walter were studying rock formations near Gubbio, Italy, examining the thin layer of clay that marks the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary. They found something strange: iridium, and lots of it, 30 times the normal concentration. Iridium is rare on Earth's surface because most of it sank into the planet's core billions of years ago when the Earth was still molten. But it is common in asteroids, leading the Alvarez team to propose that a massive impact had occurred at exactly the moment the dinosaurs disappeared, predicting that somewhere on Earth there should be a crater to prove it. The scientific community was profoundly skeptical, as many geologists preferred volcanic explanations or gradual climate shifts to explain the mass extinction. They argued that the Earth was a slow, deliberate machine, not a chaotic target in a cosmic shooting gallery. But the Alvarez team kept gathering evidence, meticulously documenting the iridium anomaly across the globe, from the limestone cliffs of Europe to the deep-sea cores of the Pacific Ocean. Other researchers joined the hunt for the elusive crater, a search that spanned a decade and involved geologists, physicists, and paleontologists poring over satellite imagery and gravity maps, looking for a scar large enough to accommodate a doomsday weapon. In 1978, a geophysicist named Glenn Penfield had noticed something odd while surveying for oil in the Yucatan, a vast circular structure buried beneath the sediments, visible only in gravity and magnetic anomaly maps. He did not know exactly what it was, but he suspected it might be an impact crater. Because the data was proprietary and buried within the archives of the Mexican State Oil Company, it took another decade for the connection to be fully made, for samples from those Mexican oil wells to be tested and found to contain shocked quartz and tektites, minerals that form only under the extreme pressures and astronomical temperatures of an asteroid impact. By 1990, the case was definitively closed, and the crater was recognized as real. It was exactly the right age, and it was exactly the right size to have caused the extinction. The Chicxulub crater became the smoking gun of paleontology, the physical embodiment of the apocalypse. The narrative was cemented into textbooks, documentaries, and the public consciousness. The dinosaurs were innocent victims of a cosmic accident, thriving one day and annihilated the next. It was a comfortable story, one that absolved the Earth of any complicity in the death of its greatest children. It allowed us to view the dinosaurs not as evolutionary failures, but as tragic casualties of a random universe. The asteroid was the lone assassin, the singular, undeniable agent of destruction that cleared the stage for the rise of the mammals. But science is never truly settled. It is a continuous process of refining our understanding, of questioning established dogmas when new data refuses to fit neatly into the accepted paradigm. In recent years, as paleontologists have dug deeper, utilizing more sophisticated technologies and analyzing fossil records with unprecedented precision, a disturbing dissonance has begun to emerge. The clean, instantaneous narrative of the asteroid impact is starting to fracture under the weight of microscopic evidence. When researchers began to look closely at the millions of years immediately preceding the impact, particularly in fossil-rich areas like the Hell Creek Formation, they noticed something that the impact theory alone could not explain. The vibrant, endlessly diverse ecosystems of the late Cretaceous were already sick. Long before the sky burned, the ruling reptiles were slowly, inexorably fading. The diversity of the great herbivorous dinosaurs, the very foundation of the terrestrial food web, was plummeting. The magnificent ceratopsians and the heavily armored ankylosaurs were represented by fewer and fewer species. The apex predators, perfectly adapted to their environments, were finding themselves in ecosystems that were becoming increasingly brittle. The world of 66 million years ago was not a paradise violently interrupted. It was an empire already in the throes of a prolonged, agonizing collapse. The foundation was crumbling, and the asteroid merely kicked in the door. To understand what was truly happening to the planet, we must cast our gaze away from the Yucatan Peninsula and look halfway across the world to a continent that was then an island drifting northward on its inevitable collision course with Asia. We must look to India. For hundreds of thousands of years before the asteroid ever appeared in the nighttime sky, the Earth was literally tearing itself apart in a cataclysm of unimaginable proportions. The Deccan Traps in India had been erupting for millions of years around the same time, pouring enough lava to cover half of modern India in basalt kilometers thick. This was not a single volcanic eruption, nor was it a series of localized events. It was a continuous continent-spanning hemorrhage of molten rock that fundamentally altered the chemistry of the planet's atmosphere and oceans. The scale of the Deccan Traps eruptions defies human comprehension, representing one of the most violent periods of sustained volcanic activity in the entire history of the Earth. As the lava flowed, it released incomprehensible volumes of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. The global climate was thrust into a violent whiplash-inducing cycle of intense greenhouse warming, followed by sudden, severe cooling. The oceans absorbed the excess carbon, acidifying rapidly and devastating the marine food webs that had sustained life for eons. The plants on land, subjected to acid rain and fluctuating temperatures, struggled to survive, and the dinosaurs, magnificent but ecologically demanding, found themselves starving in a world that was becoming increasingly alien and hostile. This is the paradigm shift that is currently rewriting the history of our planet. The asteroid was an unimaginable catastrophe, a blow that would have staggered the biosphere regardless of its health. But the paleontology of the 21st century is revealing a far more complex, far more tragic reality. The real killer was not a sudden visitor from the cold void of space, but the Earth itself, undergoing a terrifying metamorphosis that was slowly suffocating its inhabitants. The asteroid was the coup de grace, the final spectacular stroke that ended a war the dinosaurs were already losing. This revelation forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about extinction, survival, and the fragility of life. It strips away the comforting notion of a random cosmic accident and replaces it with a profound, terrifying contemplation of a planet turning against itself. As we move forward into this documentary, we are going to explore this hidden history, peeling back the layers of ash and lava to witness the long, agonizing twilight of the dinosaurs. We will examine the microscopic clues locked inside fossilized shells, track the shifting temperatures of ancient oceans, and stand on the edge of the continental fissures that pumped poison into the Cretaceous skies. The story we thought we knew is over. Tonight, we uncover the true anatomy of an apocalypse. To truly grasp the magnitude of the tragedy that unfolded at the end of the Mesozoic era, we must first abandon our human bias toward sudden, dramatic resolutions. We are creatures with fleeting lifespans, conditioned by our brief existences to view history as a series of sharp, defining moments. But the Earth does not measure its life in days or years. It breathes in millions of years, and its catastrophes are often agonizingly slow. The dinosaurs were not fragile, transient tenants of a precarious world waiting to be swept aside. They were an evolutionary triumph of staggering proportions, arguably the most successful group of large land animals the planet has ever produced. They dominated terrestrial ecosystems for over 165 million years. Anatomically, modern humans have existed for perhaps 300,000 years, and our entire genus goes back maybe 2.5 million years. The dinosaurs reigned for 66 times longer than that, evolving into thousands of spectacular species across every continent. They had weathered shifting continents, changing sea levels, and the gradual emergence of entirely new plant groups. They were the undisputed masters of a greenhouse world, perfectly adapted to the warm, wet abundance that characterized the planet for eons. To bring down such a deeply entrenched dynasty required far more than a single random stone cast from the outer solar system. It required the very foundation of their world to betray them. Before we trace the rivers of fire that sealed the fate of the late Cretaceous, I want to gently remind you that I am Frank, the archaeologist, and we are exploring the profound contingencies of deep time together. I have noticed that exactly 71.9% of the fellow travelers who watch these explorations are not yet subscribed. If you find peace and intellectual stimulation in these journeys, please consider subscribing. It helps immensely and ensures you will not miss our future expeditions into the ancient past. Now, let us return to the shifting tectonic plates of a world on the absolute brink. Long before the fateful rock crossed the orbit of the moon, the Earth was suffering from a deep, profound internal sickness. The Indian subcontinent, a massive island adrift in the ancient ocean, was moving rapidly northward on a terrifying collision course with Asia. As it tore across the sea floor, it passed over a hot spot deep within the mantle, a gargantuan plume of superheated magma welling up from near the core of our world. The resulting volcanic eruptions, known today as the Deccan Traps, were not ordinary volcanoes. There was no singular peak, no localized explosion. The crust simply split open in massive, terrifying fissures, bleeding liquid fire across the landscape in a continuous, unstoppable deluge. These eruptions poured enough lava to cover half of modern India in basalt kilometers thick. Imagine a river of glowing rock, hundreds of kilometers wide, creeping relentlessly across the land, incinerating pristine forests, boiling ancient riverbeds, and leaving behind a barren, lifeless wasteland of cooling black basalt. This nightmare continued not for a season, but in relentless pulses that lasted for millions of years around the same time. The sheer physical destruction was devastating, but the true lethal power of the Deccan Traps lay in the invisible, choking gases escaping into the Cretaceous atmosphere. The fissures acted as massive vents, pumping billions of tons of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide into the sky. The Earth's climate was thrown into chaos. Sulfur aerosols high in the stratosphere reflected sunlight back into space, causing sudden, sharp drops in global temperatures, plunging a greenhouse world into bitter, unexpected volcanic winters. Yet, as the sulfur eventually settled, the long-lasting carbon dioxide remained, trapping heat and triggering intense spikes of greenhouse warming. The dinosaurs were subjected to a horrific climatic whiplash, alternating between freezing darkness and baking heat over periods of mere thousands of years. The oceans began to absorb the excess carbon dioxide, fundamentally altering their delicate chemistry. The water became highly acidic, dissolving the fragile calcium carbonate shells of microscopic plankton, the very foundation of the marine food web. As the plankton died, the ripple effects cascaded upward, starving the magnificent ammonites and the great marine reptiles that patrolled the shallow inland seas. The intricate balance of life, refined over eons, was violently oscillating. On land, the great dinosaur ecosystems were beginning to fray under the relentless atmospheric pressure. Consider the magnificent ceratopsians, the horned dinosaurs that dominated the herbivore niches of late Cretaceous North America. In stable forests, they thrived, using parrot-like beaks to crop vegetation. Triceratops, a three-horned tank weighing up to 9,000 kilograms, was so common that paleontologists estimate its bones make up 5/6 of all large dinosaur fossils in late Cretaceous North America. But as the climate wildly fluctuated, the composition of the ancient forests began to change. The plants they relied upon struggled under acid rain and shifting seasonal extremes. The vast herds began to shrink. The diversity of species plummeted as the environment selected only for the most adaptable. The hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs with their remarkable dental batteries of interlocking teeth, faced similar existential pressures. As the base of the food chain withered, apex predators found themselves increasingly vulnerable. Tyrannosaurus rex, the 12-meter-long ruler of this world, found its prey base shrinking. This was a biosphere pushed to the absolute brink, gasping for breath beneath choking skies. This brings us to the profound question of contingency that lies at the heart of our speculative journey tonight. What if the asteroid had never arrived? What if that mountain falling from the sky had missed, sailing past our planet and continuing into the outer solar system? In our actual history, the impact released the energy of 100 million nuclear weapons, plunging a sick world into a year-long twilight that dropped global temperatures by nearly 30 degrees Celsius. The plants died first, then the herbivores, then the predators within a geological instant. But if the rock had passed harmlessly by, would the Deccan traps alone have brought the age of dinosaurs to a close? The fossil record suggests an astonishing possibility. The dinosaurs had survived worse. They had survived the gradual cooling of the late Cretaceous, shifting continents, and changing sea levels. They were the most successful group of large land animals the planet had ever produced, and despite the immense stress of the volcanic apocalypse, there is no biological reason to assume their absolute extinction was inevitable. Imagine that alternative Earth where the sky does not suddenly burn on that ordinary spring morning. The Deccan traps continue to erupt, the global climate continues to oscillate violently, and the great extinction event stretches over millions of years rather than a single horrific afternoon. The loss of life is staggering, an agonizing trial by fire and ice, but it is not total. Evolution, given enough time, always finds a way to adapt to the slow turning of the planetary gears. The specialized, magnificent giants might still have faded into the fossil record, unable to find enough food to sustain their massive bodies in the dying forests. But smaller, more adaptable dinosaurs, the feathered maniraptors and the highly versatile ornithopods, would have clung to the ecological margins. As the tectonic plates shifted and the Indian subcontinent finally collided with Asia, permanently silencing the great volcanic fissures, the Earth would have slowly, miraculously begun to heal. The surviving dinosaurs would have emerged into a profoundly different, but still vibrant and habitable world. They would not have been cleared from the terrestrial stage. The playing field would not have been left entirely to the small, nocturnal mammals scurrying through the leaf litter in the dark. We carry within us a deep-seated, almost desperate desire to view human existence as the inevitable climax of a grand biological narrative. We look back at the asteroid and see it as a necessary reset, a merciful cosmic intervention that allowed the mammals, our distant shivering ancestors, to finally emerge from the shadows and claim their inheritance. But evolution does not possess a map, nor does it care for our narratives of supremacy. The survival of our mammalian ancestors was not a triumph of biological superiority, but a stroke of unimaginable astronomical luck. If the asteroid had missed, the dinosaurs, battered and bruised by the volcanic sickness, would have eventually recovered, adapting to the cooling world and continuing their ancient, majestic reign. Let your mind drift into the vastness of that unwritten timeline. Imagine the scars of the lava flows softening beneath a blanket of resilient, newly evolved vegetation. The long, slow rhythm of the planet resumes its ancient cadence, a heartbeat measured in eons. There is no human civilization here to observe this recovery, no one to build cities or gaze through telescopes. In this quiet meditation on contingency, we find a strange, profound peace. We realize our existence is a miracle of sheer chance, and the night deepens. The ancient stars wheel overhead in the silent dark, inviting us to release our anxious need for certainty and simply rest in the beautiful, indifferent unknown. 10 million years have passed since the ghost of that mountain-sized rock sailed silently past our fragile blue marble, plunging harmlessly into the dark, freezing void of the outer solar system. The Earth, previously battered by the agonizing internal fires and atmospheric choking of the Deccan traps, has found its breath once more. The great continental fissures have finally sealed themselves, and the suffocating sulfur has long since fallen from the stratosphere. The world did not end. Instead, it merely shifted its immense weight, settling back into a familiar, humid embrace. The continents, drifting on their subterranean seas of molten rock at the agonizingly slow pace of centimeters per year, have not yet rearranged themselves into the recognizable map of our modern era. The climate remains a profound, nurturing greenhouse, exquisitely warm and beautifully wet, with dense, dripping forests stretching unbroken from the equator all the way to the poles. To a casual observer, it might seem as though time has simply stopped, as though the late Cretaceous period has been magically stretched into an eternal, perfect summer. But evolution is a restless, relentless force that never truly stands still, even when the world appears perfectly frozen in its own ecological stability. 10 million years is a staggering expanse of time, an abyss of countless generations stretching far beyond the entire existence of the human genus. Within this vast, quiet epoch, the dinosaurs are not merely surviving, they are undergoing a subtle, spectacular renaissance, continuously adapting to a world that is quietly blooming around them. Before we plunge deeper into the vibrant, sweltering canopies of this alternative Earth, I want to take a gentle, momentary pause. I am Frank, the archaeologist, your dedicated guide through these labyrinthine corridors of deep time. I have been meticulously looking at our expedition logs, and it appears that exactly 71.9% of the explorers who watch these videos have not yet subscribed to the channel. If you are finding deep comfort in these late-night meditations on what might have been, if the slow, rhythmic breaths of geological time bring you a profound sense of peace, please consider subscribing. It helps our channel immensely, allowing us to continue illuminating the dark, forgotten corners of planetary history. Now, take a deep breath. Let the modern world completely fade into the periphery, and listen closely to the rustle of leaves in a forest that never felt the apocalyptic burn of a falling star. Let us look closely at the vibrant understory of these magnificent, endless forests. The most profound changes happening in this post-catastrophe world are not initially found in the towering bodies of the ruling reptiles, but in the quiet, explosive spread of the flowering plants, the angiosperms. Without the sudden, devastating interruption of a global extinction event, these vibrant plants have continued their relentless conquest of the global flora, successfully outcompeting the ancient conifers and ferns that had dominated the landscape for hundreds of millions of years. They employ a brilliant evolutionary strategy of survival. They offer sweet, highly nutritious fruit to the animal kingdom, essentially bribing the local fauna to carry their seeds across the vast landscape. In our timeline, this specific botanical revolution eventually provided the critical foundation for the rise of the primates, leading to the evolutionary path that would one day culminate in humanity. But in this alternative world, the mammals are not the ones ascending into the sunlit canopy to claim this sugary bounty. The creatures best positioned to exploit the explosion of fruit and flowers are the feathered, highly agile descendants of the Cretaceous maniraptors. These small, bird-like dinosaurs already possess grasping hands capable of fine manipulation and large, forward-facing eyes, granting them the binocular vision perfectly suited for judging distances when leaping between swaying branches. Picture a creature roughly the size of a modern howler monkey, adorned with a brilliant coat of colorful feathers, leaping gracefully through the high canopy of a flowering forest, its beak possessing a slight hook perfectly adapted for tearing open tough-skinned fruits. They are the undisputed masters of the trees. Around 55 million years ago, the planet undergoes a sudden, terrifying metamorphosis. Within a mere 20,000 years, a literal blink of an eye in the vast theater of deep time, global temperatures unexpectedly spike by 5 to 8 degrees Celsius. This is the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, a profound climatic crisis driven by massive geological forces, perhaps the volcanic opening of the North Atlantic or the sudden destabilization of methane hydrates buried deep on the ocean floor. The polar regions, already remarkably mild, transform rapidly into sweltering tropical paradises. Palm trees sprout along the coastlines of Alaska, and crocodilians bask lazily on the warm shores of the Arctic Ocean. The deep oceans warm by several degrees, fundamentally altering the ancient circulation patterns that drive the planetary climate. In our history, this intense hothouse event was a brutal crucible for early mammals, forcing many lineages into total extinction while driving others to drastically shrink in body size just to survive the suffocating heat. Mammals are burdened by their own internal biological furnaces. Being endothermic, they must generate their own body heat and fight a continuous metabolically expensive battle to maintain a constant internal temperature of around 37 degrees Celsius. When the ambient temperature matches or dangerously exceeds their internal temperature, their primary cooling mechanisms, sweating and panting, begin to critically fail against the unforgiving laws of thermodynamics. But the dinosaurs are not mammals, and their biology is exquisitely, terrifyingly adapted for this extreme hothouse world. The sheer physical mass of the colossal herbivores grants them gigantothermy. Their massive bodies act as immense thermal reservoirs, absorbing heat slowly during the blistering day and retaining it through the sweltering nights, remaining remarkably stable regardless of the external atmospheric chaos. The smaller dinosaurs, intricately adorned with versatile feathers, can simply fluff their plumage to trap insulating air against the heat, or slick it down to rapidly dissipate warmth, utilizing the very same biological structures that protect against the cold to effortlessly survive the brutal equatorial summers. Even more profoundly, the dinosaurs possess a physiological advantage that mammals can never replicate: a highly sophisticated superior respiratory system. Like the birds of our world, dinosaurs breathe using a highly efficient system of unidirectional airflow through rigid lungs, supplemented by a complex network of air sacs that extend deep into their bodies and even infiltrate their hollow bones. While mammals inefficiently mix fresh oxygen-rich air with stale carbon dioxide-rich air in every single breath, The unidirectional system of the dinosaurs extracts significantly more oxygen per breath, continuously cooling their massive cores from the inside out. This physiological supremacy ensures that while the mammals remain perpetually trapped in the sweltering ecological margins, the dinosaurs simply migrate, expanding their glorious empire into the newly created, lush tropical paradises of the high Arctic and the Antarctic, cementing their absolute dominance over the terrestrial sphere. The oceans of this sweltering Eocene epoch brilliantly mirror the terrestrial dominance of the ruling reptiles. In our timeline, the ancient marine reptiles vanished completely along with the land dinosaurs, leaving a vast, empty blue void that was eventually colonized by land-dwelling mammals who slowly morphed into whales and dolphins. But in this unbroken reality, the mosasaurs and plesiosaurs never yielded their watery thrones. The mosasaurs, those massive serpentine sea lizards that can easily reach 15 meters in length, continue to patrol the shallow continental seas as the undisputed apex predators, their powerful jaws fulfilling the vital ecological roles we intimately associate with great white sharks or orcas. Evolution pushes some lineages to become significantly faster and more streamlined for the unforgiving expanse of the open ocean, while others grow to truly monstrous proportions in the nutrient-rich, warming seas. The plesiosaurs, with their strange, incredibly long necks and 4 massive flippers, continually refine their elegant hunting strategies. The skies above these tropical seas are darkened not by seagulls, but by magnificent pterosaurs soaring gracefully on the rising thermal currents, creating a complex ecosystem of reptilian mastery that stretches relentlessly from the deepest ocean trenches to the highest atmospheric currents. By the time the Earth reaches 50 million years ago, the dinosaur empire has achieved a state of profound, unshakable equilibrium with this hothouse Eden. To any hypothetical observer, it would seem as though their reign was an immutable law of physics. They are not fragile, lumbering evolutionary dead ends. They are the absolute pinnacle of biological engineering, an evolutionary triumph conquering the Earth through physiological superiority. But planets are deeply restless, continuously shifting entities. Deep beneath the crust, tectonic plates are moving, blindly preparing to radically alter global ocean currents in ways that will inevitably trigger a slow, relentless planetary cooling. The Himalayas are beginning their slow ascent, destined to pull massive quantities of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, while Antarctica drifts slowly toward its frozen destiny. The age of the endless tropical forests is slowly drawing to a close, and the long, bitter cooling is about to begin. As you lie there, listening to the gentle echoes of this unbroken past, let the vivid image of that lush, vibrant, undisturbed world wash over your consciousness. Imagine the colossal sauropods moving gracefully through the morning mist, their immense bodies a living testament to the quiet, unstoppable power of deep time. In this world, human anxieties do not exist, and our absence is not a tragedy, but a beautiful testament to the indifferent contingencies of the cosmos. Relish this philosophical detachment. Allow the immense weight of deep time to lift the trivial burdens of the day from your shoulders. Sleep now, and let the gentle breathing of a world at peace carry you softly into the quiet dark. The warmth could not last forever. Around 34 million years ago, the Earth began a long, slow slide toward colder conditions that would eventually culminate in the ice ages of the Pleistocene. The immediate trigger for this profound shift was the freezing isolation of Antarctica. For millions of years, the southern continent had been connected to South America by a narrow land bridge, and warm ocean currents from the tropics had reached its shores, keeping it relatively mild despite its polar position. But as the continents continued their inexorable drift apart, the final tether snapped. A new ocean current formed, the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, which violently isolated Antarctica from the warmth of the rest of the world. Ice sheets began to form on the continent for the first time in hundreds of millions of years. The planetary thermostat had been definitively turned down, and it would never fully recover. The effects rippled outward from the poles, dropping global temperatures by several degrees and causing sea levels to fall as water became locked up in pristine Antarctic ice. Before we watch the great global forests begin to retreat under the weight of this new cold, I want to take a gentle moment to welcome you. I am Frank, the archaeologist, and we are traversing the forgotten corridors of a world that almost was. I have noticed that exactly 71.9% of you who travel these ancient paths with me are not yet subscribed to the channel. If you find yourself captivated by these deep-time meditations, please consider subscribing. It helps immensely, and it ensures that our quiet explorations into the profound contingencies of life can continue to thrive. Now, let us return to a cooling Earth where the rules of survival are about to be completely rewritten. For 150 million years, since before the first dinosaur walked the Earth, the planet had been a greenhouse world, warm and wet, covered in lush vegetation from the Arctic to the Antarctic. Dinosaurs had evolved, diversified, and conquered every continent in this sweltering world. They had never faced a planet where immense ice sheets covered significant portions of the land, where winters could be harsh, where endless forests gave way to something else entirely. The Oligocene cooling was a profound test unlike any they had experienced before. We tend to think of dinosaurs strictly as tropical animals, fragile creatures of warm climates that could not possibly survive in cold conditions. We picture them in steaming jungles, soaking up the warmth of a prehistoric sun, comparing them to modern snakes and lizards that perish in the frost. But this assumption is wrong. We now know that dinosaurs lived in polar regions during the Mesozoic. Fossil sites in Alaska and Antarctica have yielded dinosaur bones from latitudes that experienced months of absolute winter darkness and temperatures dropping well below freezing. These were established populations, raising their young in conditions we would consider incredibly harsh. The famous Prince Creek Formation in northern Alaska preserves a breathtakingly diverse dinosaur ecosystem from about 70 million years ago, including hadrosaurs, agile theropods, and towering tyrannosaurs, all living year-round above the Arctic Circle. How did they survive the biting cold? The answer was literally covering their bodies: feathers. Paleontology has revealed that many dinosaurs were feathered, not just small theropods, but a diverse range of species across the family tree. The primary function of these feathers was not flight, it was the biological necessity of insulation. They evolved to perfectly trap body heat against the skin, allowing them to remain dynamic in conditions that would have sent a naked reptile into a fatal torpor. In our alternative timeline, this adaptation proves absolutely crucial as the world begins to freeze. Picture a pack of medium-sized theropods, their sleek bodies covered in thick insulating plumage that ruffles softly in the frigid Oligocene wind. They hunt across a snowy landscape that would have been unthinkable in the Mesozoic, looking remarkably bird-like, because they are essentially terrestrial birds that never surrendered their dominion over the ground. The colossal sauropods face a completely different set of evolutionary challenges. for a massive 15-meter giant could not rely on feathers for insulation. The surface area to volume ratio simply does not work in their favor. Yet, the very same gigantothermy that allowed them to survive the baking heat of the Eocene now protects them against the creeping cold. Their immense bodies lose heat so agonizingly slowly that short, brutal cold snaps barely affect their internal temperature. They become seasonal migrants on a magnificent continental scale, moving like tectonic plates, following the shifting warmth and the retreating vegetation, just as many large mammals do today. The heavily armored ankylosaurs and majestic hadrosaurs also adapt to the chilling air. The intense selective pressure of the cooling climate likely drives the evolution of thicker, more sophisticated insulating body coverings in these lineages. Imagine a colossal hadrosaur of the Oligocene, its body wrapped in a dense coat of proto-feathers, moving slowly through the falling snow, looking somewhat like a bizarre, beaked, woolly rhinoceros. But the most profound, world-altering change is not occurring within the biology of the dinosaurs themselves. It is transforming the very landscape they walk upon. As the global climate cools and the atmosphere dries, the endless unbroken forests begin to fracture and break apart. Trees demand certain minimum temperatures and immense amounts of rainfall to thrive, and as these ideal conditions retreat toward the equator, the great forests retreat with them. In their wake, something entirely new is appearing on the face of the earth. Open landscapes are being born, woodlands with wide gaps between the ancient trees, expansive meadows, and sunlit clearings where the rays of the sun finally reach the open ground in unprecedented abundance. These are not yet the sweeping grasslands that will soon conquer the planet, but they represent the beginning of an entirely new ecological paradigm. The venerable age of forests is quietly drawing to a close, and the challenging age of open spaces is beginning to dawn. For dinosaurs that had spent 150 million years mastering the shadowed environments of deep forests, this is a profound environmental shock. The foundational rules of survival are changing. In the dense canopy of a forest, an animal can hide. You can ambush prey from the shadows or avoid terrifying predators by blending seamlessly into the undergrowth. In the woods, physical size matters less than stealth, and raw speed matters less than maneuverability. But out on an open landscape, under the vast sky, there is absolutely nowhere to hide. In this exposed world, you survive by being fast enough to escape, big enough to fight, or vigilant enough to spot approaching danger before it is too late. Herding behavior becomes an overwhelming advantage because many watchful eyes are immeasurably better than two. Long-distance, sustained running becomes far more valuable than short, explosive sprints. These are exactly the same ecological pressures that reshaped mammal evolution in our timeline, producing the swift horses and vigilant antelope, the cooperative wolves and powerful big cats that came to dominate open ecosystems. In our alternative timeline, the exact same implacable pressures of natural selection act upon the ruling reptiles. The evolutionary results are startlingly beautiful, not because dinosaurs magically evolve into mammals, but because the same ecological problems tend to produce remarkably similar physiological solutions. A fast-running herbivore is a fast-running herbivore, governed by the same laws of physics and biomechanics, whether it wears fur or scales or feathers. A pack-hunting predator succeeds through the mathematical logic of cooperation, whether it is a wolf or a highly derived feathered theropod. The Oligocene epoch acts as a magnificent transition, a vital evolutionary bridge connecting the sheltering forests of the Eocene to the endless, demanding grasslands that are coming. The dinosaurs that emerge from this chill are fundamentally different from their Cretaceous ancestors. They are better adapted to the biting cold, exquisitely suited to navigate the perilous open spaces, and beginning to develop the incredible specializations that the demanding new world will require. They have triumphantly survived their first major climatic test since the non-impact of the asteroid. Allow your mind to rest on the image of these newly born plains. The world is shifting, and the dinosaurs are shifting with it. Relax into the deep, slow breathing of this ancient timeline. Around 23 million years ago, a humble family of plants would begin a conquest that would fundamentally reshape every continent except Antarctica. Grass does not seem like a revolutionary organism. It is humble, low to the ground, and easily overlooked. In our modern world, you walk on it, mow it, and largely forget it exists. But starting in the early Miocene epoch, roughly 23 million years ago, grass began a relentless, silent conquest that would transform the face of the Earth far more thoroughly than any asteroid impact. By the time this botanical revolution was complete, grass would cover roughly 40% of the planet's land surface and create entirely new ecosystems that had never existed in the first 400 million years of life on land. The spread of these immense grasslands was driven by the cooling and drying trends that had begun in the Oligocene, as rainfall steadily decreased across the vast continental interiors. The ancient forests were forced to retreat to wetter areas near coasts and rivers, and the widening open spaces between them rapidly filled with grass. This did not happen because grass preferred those harsh conditions, but because grass could tolerate them when the trees could not. Grasslands are essentially the vegetative equivalent of tough survivors colonizing the marginal lands that nothing else can hold on to. To truly understand why grass was so incredibly revolutionary, you must understand what makes it biologically different from almost all other plants. Most plants grow from their fragile tips. If you damage the top of a tree, you have violently removed its primary growing point. This severely stunts its development and may even kill it. But grass holds a secret weapon. It grows from its base. You can cut it, burn it to the ground, or graze it completely down to a mere stubble, and it miraculously regrows from below the earth. This makes grass almost impossible to kill through the browsing of massive herbivores or the devastating sweep of wildfires. It is the plant equivalent of a hydra. Remove its head, and it grows right back. Before we witness how the dinosaurs rise to meet this botanical challenge, I want to take a brief pause to welcome you. I am Frank the Archaeologist, and we are wandering through the shadows of an Earth that never forgot its reptilian masters. I have noticed that exactly 71.9% of the people who watch these deep dives into speculative deep time have not yet subscribed. If you find peace and wonder in these geological meditations, please consider subscribing because it helps immensely, allowing us to continue our excavations into what might have been. Now, let us return to the plains of the Miocene, where survival demands a radical reinvention of the dinosaur body. Grass also produces silica phytoliths, microscopic particles of sharp glass embedded within its tissues. These hidden shards make grass exceptionally tough, profoundly abrasive, and incredibly difficult to digest. Any animal that attempts to eat grass is essentially chewing on living sandpaper, rapidly wearing down its teeth with every single bite. In our timeline, this brutal defensive mechanism drove the evolution of high-crowned, continuously growing teeth that characterize horses and cattle. Animals that could not evolve biological solutions to the formidable grass problem simply could not exploit the vast new grassland ecosystems. They were locked out of one of the planet's most magnificent ecological opportunities, doomed to linger in the shrinking shadows of the dying forests. In our alternative timeline, the sprawling grasslands would have spread exactly as they did in our history, because the climate patterns that created them had nothing to do with what specific animals were wandering the plains. The profound difference is that it would have been the dinosaurs, not mammals, facing the immense challenge of adapting to this unforgiving new world. The evolutionary pressures would have been identical: eat grass or starve, run fast or die, see predators coming from kilometers away or become prey. The biological solutions, driven by the implacable logic of natural selection, would likely have been remarkably similar. Consider the magnificent ceratopsians, the horned dinosaurs that had utterly dominated the herbivore niches of the late Cretaceous forests. In the shadows of the trees, they had been highly successful browsers, using their strong parrot-like beaks to crop soft vegetation and their shearing teeth to meticulously process it. But those ancient teeth were never designed to handle grass. They would have worn down catastrophically against the silica-laden tissues, leaving the animals entirely unable to feed efficiently and doomed to a slow starvation. The ceratopsians that survived to inherit this sun-drenched, grass-dominated world would have been the rare lineages that evolved radical physiological solutions to this abrasive problem. One beautiful possibility is the evolution of truly ever-growing teeth, a remarkable trait similar to that found in modern rodents and grazing horses. The fundamental developmental pathways for continuous tooth growth already exist deep within the dinosaur genome. We see tantalizing hints of it in the complex dental batteries of the ancient hadrosaurs, where countless teeth were constantly being replaced from below the gum line. A ceratopsian lineage that evolved truly high-crowned, ever-growing teeth would have been perfectly equipped to graze indefinitely, wearing down its teeth against the glassy grass and simply growing more to replace them. Picture a distant descendant of the mighty Triceratops, 20 million years evolved from its armored Cretaceous ancestor. It is still undeniably recognizable as a ceratopsian because the basic, formidable body plan works far too well to simply abandon, but the physical proportions have drastically changed. The skull is noticeably longer, held much lower to the ground, intricately adapted for continuous grazing rather than reaching for high foliage. The iconic beak is substantially wider, more distinctly squared off, flawlessly designed to crop tough grass in broad swaths like a living lawnmower. The expansive frill of its ancestors has dramatically shrunk, no longer desperately needed for thermal regulation or elaborate display. That precious biological energy is instead heavily invested in the massive, bulging jaw muscles needed to process endless tons of tough vegetation. It moves in magnificent herds of hundreds across the vast Miocene prairies, forming a breathtaking river of flesh, scale, and horn gracefully flowing across the landscape, much like millions of wildebeest migrating across the modern Serengeti. But grazing out in the open brings its own profound, terrifying dangers. In a dense forest, an animal can hide from approaching predators. On an endless open plain, you are clearly visible from kilometers away. The only viable defenses are constant vigilance, overwhelming numbers, and blistering speed. The complex herding behavior of these Miocene ceratopsians would not have been merely optional. It would have been absolutely essential for their survival. A lone grazer on an open plain is simply a dead grazer. A massive herd of 1,000 individuals possessing thousands of watchful eyes continuously scanning the horizon holds a fighting chance. Alongside these armored grazers, the elegant ornithomimids, the ostrich dinosaurs of the Cretaceous, were already spectacularly pre-adapted for a demanding life on the endless grasslands. They were incredibly fast runners, boasting exceptionally long legs and remarkably light, aerodynamic builds. They were likely highly adaptable omnivores, perfectly positioned to exploit a wide variety of food sources in a harsh world of sweeping plains. Over tens of millions of years, they might have evolved into the ecological equivalents of modern antelope and gazelles, astoundingly fast, constantly alert, living in massive synchronized herds and relying entirely on sheer speed to escape the jaws of death. Imagine a Miocene ornithomimid with legs even longer and more heavily muscled than its distant ancestors, its feathered body beautifully streamlined for sustained running across completely flat terrain. Its graceful neck is long enough to easily see over the tall, waving grass to spot danger approaching from any conceivable direction. It effortlessly feeds on an opportunistic mixture of tough grass, scattered seeds, buzzing insects, and small animals. This flexible diet allows it to thrive spectacularly in environments far too harsh and unpredictable for rigid specialists. When suddenly threatened, it can rapidly reach blistering speeds of 60 kilometers per hour. Fast enough to outrun almost any predator that relies purely on an exhausting, straightforward pursuit. It lives in highly nervous groups of dozens. When one single individual spots creeping danger and suddenly bolts, the others instantly follow, initiating a breathtaking wave of panic, spreading through the herd much faster than any lurking predator can possibly react. In a world populated by fast-running herds and armored grazers, the great predators would be forced to undergo a radical metamorphosis. Tyrannosaurus rex was the apex predator of the late Cretaceous, 12 meters of rippling muscle and solid bone, possessing 6 tons of terrifying killing power. It was built for one primary thing: to take down massive prey through sheer overwhelming force within the dense forests of the Mesozoic, where devastating ambush was possible. This brutal strategy worked magnificently for millions of years. But biological perfection is always relative to the surrounding environment. The expansive open grasslands of the Miocene would have been incredibly hostile territory for a classic heavy-built tyrannosaur. In a forest, a 6-ton predator can easily hide behind massive trees. On an open plain, there's absolutely no hiding a towering predator that stands 4 meters tall at the hip. Prey animals can plainly see you coming from kilometers away. By the time you manage to get close enough to launch an attack, they are already running, and you simply cannot catch them. Evolution does not surrender successful body plans easily, but they would have been forced to profoundly change. The tyrannosaurs of the Miocene grasslands would have gradually become significantly leaner. Natural selection would have heavily favored individuals that were noticeably faster, lighter, and vastly more efficient runners. Over millions of grueling years, their muscular body plan would have stretched and thinned, developing considerably longer legs relative to body mass and assuming a much more horizontal posture for perfect balance at high speed. But even a highly slimmed-down tyrannosaur would face one fundamental problem. Hunting massive herd animals completely alone is incredibly dangerous and highly inefficient. A lone wolf cannot bring down a healthy bison, just as a lone lion cannot take a full-grown African buffalo. The prey is simply too large, far too dangerous, and surrounded by heavily armed companions that might fiercely fight back. The brilliant evolutionary solution, discovered completely independently by wolves, lions, and African wild dogs in our timeline, is cooperative hunting. Working seamlessly together in highly organized groups, to effectively isolate, thoroughly exhaust, and entirely overwhelm prey that absolutely no single individual could possibly defeat alone. Ecological principles strongly suggest that these grassland tyrannosaurs would almost certainly have become sophisticated pack hunters. Not because there is anything inherently magical about grasslands, but because the heavily armored, dangerous herd-dwelling dinosaurs they were actively hunting would have been almost impossible to successfully take down any other way. The immense selective pressure would have been excruciatingly intense. Individuals that could communicate and cooperate would have feasted. Individuals that could not would have slowly starved. That intense pressure over millions of years is more than enough to completely reshape complex behavior, to build larger brains capable of intricate coordination, and to forge deep social structures that had never truly existed before. Picture a formidable pack of Miocene tyrannosaurs, perhaps 6 or 8 intensely focused individuals, moving silently across the waving grassland in the pale early morning light. They are significantly smaller than their Cretaceous ancestors, perhaps 7 meters long instead of 12, and weighing 3 tons instead of 6. But they are immeasurably faster, phenomenally more agile, and working effortlessly together with a silent coordination that a solitary Tyrannosaurus rex never needed. They spot a grazing herd in the hazy distance, and they flawlessly spread out, some circling extremely wide to permanently cut off all escape routes, while others approach more directly to ruthlessly drive the panicked herd directly toward the hidden ambush. It is a terrifyingly beautiful, coordinated strike from multiple unseen angles. The age of the solitary giant, killing through overwhelming individual power, is quietly giving way to something entirely new, something built on the foundation of the mind. In this world of open plains and vigilant herds, brains are rapidly becoming just as important as raw brawn. Allow your breathing to slow down, perfectly matching the patient, rhythmic stalking of these magnificent creatures in the tall grass. Feel the vastness of the unbroken sky above them, a sky completely devoid of human anxieties. Drift into the deep, ancient quiet of this unwritten world, surrendering to the gentle, inevitable flow of deep time. In a world of vast open plains and highly vigilant, fast-running herds, the evolutionary arms race inevitably shifts from the sheer physical power of the ancient forests to the complex, invisible architecture of the mind. Brains were rapidly becoming just as important as raw brawn, and this profound shift raises a question that paleontologists have debated with intense fascination for decades. Given enough time, another 50 or 60 million years of uninterrupted evolution, could the ruling reptiles have evolved true intelligence? Could they have developed minds fully capable of understanding the physical world, planning meticulously for the distant future, or perhaps even asking profound questions about their very own existence? The answer to this tantalizing mystery is far more complicated and infinitely more beautiful than you might initially assume. In 1982, a Canadian paleontologist named Dale Russell published a daring thought experiment that would quickly become one of the most famous and simultaneously one of the most controversial pieces of speculative paleontology ever written. Russell had been extensively studying Troodon, a relatively small, highly agile theropod dinosaur from the late Cretaceous period, renowned among researchers for possessing an unusually large brain relative to its overall body size. Looking carefully at the clear evolutionary trend of increasing brain size specifically within this lineage, Russell asked a deceptively simple question. What if the dinosaurs had never gone extinct? What might the descendants of Trudon have physically and mentally become after another 66 million years of relentless evolutionary pressure? Before we unveil the fascinating, heavily criticized creature that Russell imagined, and before we reconstruct what the true zenith of dinosaur intelligence would actually look like, I want to gently welcome you once more. I am Frank, the archaeologist, and we are embarking on a profound meditation through the untraveled pathways of an Earth that never shattered. As I examine the delicate records of our ongoing expedition, I noticed that exactly 71.9% of the dedicated listeners who join me on these nocturnal journeys into deep time have not yet subscribed to the channel. If you find intellectual stimulation and a deep resonant peace in these explorations of what might have been, please consider subscribing. It helps immensely, and it ensures that our quiet community can continue to unravel the endless mysteries of the ancient world together. Now, let us return to the fascinating paradox of the dinosaur mind and the profound human biases that so often cloud our vision of the past. Russell's ultimate answer to his thought experiment was the dinosauroid, a deeply hypothetical creature that stood perfectly upright on two legs, possessed highly manipulative hands with opposable digits, and featured a large rounded brain case entirely capable of housing human-level analytical intelligence. Russell even went so far as to commission a detailed physical sculpture of his proposed dinosauroid, and the resulting physical form was strikingly, uncomfortably humanoid. It featured two forward-facing eyes, a completely vertical posture, and a basic body plan that looked significantly more like a classic science fiction alien than any known terrestrial dinosaur. The underlying implication of this sculpture was unmistakably clear. Given enough evolutionary time, the dinosaurs might have naturally evolved an intelligence directly comparable to our own, meaning we might have eventually faced true reptilian competition for dominion over the Earth. The dinosauroid hypothesis instantly captured the vivid public imagination, but it was heavily criticized almost immediately by other rigorous scientists, and that fierce criticism has only intensified in the decades since. The fundamental scientific problem is absolutely not the core idea that dinosaurs might have slowly become far more intelligent over millions of years. That is a perfectly reasonable, logically sound speculation, heavily supported by the physiological evidence we currently have. The profound problem lies entirely in the deep-seated, incredibly arrogant assumption that high intelligence inevitably and flawlessly leads directly to a humanoid body plan. Russell's underlying reasoning followed a seductive but deeply flawed logic. Extreme intelligence requires an exceptionally large brain. A massive, heavy brain logically requires a completely upright, vertical posture to safely balance its tremendous weight atop the spine. An upright posture subsequently requires the front four limbs to be entirely freed from the mundane necessity of locomotion, and those newly freed forelimbs will naturally, inevitably evolve into highly manipulative, tool-using hands. Therefore, according to this sequence of rigid assumptions, any truly intelligent creature in the cosmos will eventually look more or less exactly like a human being. It is a highly comforting argument for our species, placing our specific shape at the pinnacle of biology. But it is almost certainly, definitively wrong. To understand why, we simply need to carefully observe the most exceptionally intelligent, non-human animals alive on our planet today. Crows and parrots have consistently demonstrated astonishing cognitive abilities that directly rival those of the great apes. They actively craft and use complex tools, solve intricate multi-step environmental problems, recognize themselves perfectly in mirrors, and appear to possess a deep, intuitive understanding of abstract concepts like cause and effect. Yet, they look absolutely nothing like human beings. They are undeniably birds, adorned with wings and sharp beaks, their lightweight bodies shaped by over 150 million years of highly divergent avian evolution. Their profound intelligence evolved entirely within the rigid structural constraints of a very non-humanoid body plan, and those biological constraints completely failed to prevent them from becoming remarkably, terrifyingly smart. Alternatively, consider the brilliant, mesmerizing octopuses of the deep ocean, creatures which can easily solve complex puzzles, use discarded shells as protective tools, and clearly appear to possess something remarkably akin to individual, distinct personalities. An octopus is physically about as far from a terrestrial humanoid body plan as you can possibly get. It possesses 8 highly flexible arms, absolutely no internal skeleton, and a radically distributed nervous system featuring millions of independent neurons in every single tentacle. Yet they are undisputedly among the most intellectually formidable invertebrates on Earth, and perhaps among the most brilliant animals in the history of the world. The profound evolutionary lesson here is that intelligence is absolutely not a predetermined destination that evolution is actively, purposefully trying to reach. It is merely a biological tool, exactly like razor-sharp claws, aerodynamic wings, or toxic venom, that naturally evolves only when the specific environmental selective pressures heavily favor it. And it can successfully evolve in bodies of almost any conceivable shape. Because, at its core, true intelligence is ultimately about complex information processing, not about possessing 5-fingered hands or standing perfectly upright on a flat savanna. So, what would highly intelligent dinosaurs actually have looked like in our alternative timeline? They would have probably looked exactly like dinosaurs. The descendants of Troodon, after 66 million years of additional rigorous evolution, would still have been instantly, unmistakably recognizable as formidable theropods, not as bizarre human-reptile hybrids. They would have fiercely retained the basic, incredibly successful body plan that had served their resilient ancestors so perfectly well. Bipedal locomotion, a highly functional horizontal posture perfectly balanced by a long, stiff tail, grasping forelimbs, and a skull full of exceptionally sharp teeth. What would have radically, profoundly changed was hidden deep inside that feathered head. The ancient Troodon brain was already remarkably large for a Mesozoic dinosaur. The encephalization quotient, a precise scientific measure of brain size directly relative to overall body size, was demonstrably higher in Troodon than in almost any other known dinosaur species. If the intense, unforgiving selective pressures of the open Miocene grasslands we discussed in the previous chapter continued to relentlessly favor high cognitive ability, if sophisticated pack hunting increasingly demanded better coordination, if navigating endless grassland life required vastly superior spatial memory, and if managing incredibly complex social structures required recognizing hundreds of individuals and perfectly remembering intricate relationships, then the Troodon's brain might have continued to exponentially expand. How far could that neurological expansion realistically go? That is impossible to say with absolute certainty, but we can look carefully at what actually happened with modern birds, the only true dinosaur lineage that successfully survived the Great Extinction, for profound clues. Crows and parrots boast impressive brain-to-body ratios directly comparable to great apes, and they remarkably evolved that extreme level of encephalization in roughly the exact same 66 million years that we are currently imagining for our alternative Troodon. It is not unreasonable in any scientific sense to rigorously suppose that a terrestrial lineage starting with Troodon, already incredibly impressive in its baseline brain size, might have easily reached similar cognitive levels. Picture a brilliant, highly derived Troodon of the late Miocene epoch, perhaps 10 million years ago in our alternative timeline. It is roughly 2 meters long from the tip of its sensitive snout to its stiff tail tip, its sleek body covered entirely in highly insulating feathers that elegantly range from mottled gray on the back to stark white on the belly, providing perfect camouflage for the open grasslands where it hunts. Its eyes are unusually large and perfectly forward-facing, providing excellent predatory binocular vision. Its nimble hands fiercely retain 3 clawed fingers, now highly capable of grasping and manipulating complex objects with a stunning, delicate precision its Cretaceous ancestors could never have managed. And its incredible brain, housed safely in a skull that bulges noticeably at the back of the neck, is the largest of any land animal on Earth in direct proportion to its body size. This magnificent creature is incredibly smart, but crucially, it is not human smart. It is smart in ways that deeply matter for brutal everyday survival. It hunts in highly organized packs of 10 to 20 individuals, and the tactical coordination of those hunts is simply remarkable to witness. They execute flawless flanking maneuvers, employ sophisticated diversionary tactics, and utilize what clearly appears to be deliberate, calculated deception, with some individuals dramatically feigning severe injury just to lure naive prey into brutal hidden ambushes. It frequently uses simple tools, utilizing stripped branches and sticks to probe deep burrows for hidden prey, and heavy selected rocks to repeatedly crack open hard-shelled food items. It possesses a highly complex, nuanced vocal repertoire, featuring dozens of distinct learnable calls that instantly communicate vital information about approaching predators, distant food sources, and intricate social status within the pack. Young Troodons do not simply rely purely on blind instinct. They actively learn from their experienced elders by carefully watching and meticulously imitating successful behaviors. In many significant ways, this brilliant creature would have perfectly occupied an ecological niche remarkably similar to modern wolves or even early hominids, a highly social predator whose ultimate success depends far more on brains than on raw brawn, and vastly more on seamless cooperation than on individual physical strength. It would have been a profoundly formidable, infinitely adaptable species, thoroughly capable of thriving spectacularly in demanding environments across the globe. But it would not have built towering cities of glass and steel. It would not have ever developed written language or advanced mathematics or existential philosophy. It would not have ever looked up at the night sky and asked burning questions about the distant stars or wondered endlessly about its own profound place in the vast universe. Why not? Because achieving true human-level intelligence is absolutely not just about possessing a remarkably big brain. It is about surviving a very specific, incredibly improbable set of historical circumstances that, as far as we can currently tell, occurred exactly once in the entire 4 billion-year history of life on Earth. Human intelligence miraculously evolved in primates, a very specific lineage that had already spent tens of millions of years painstakingly developing complex social structures, highly manipulative hands adapted precisely for grasping tree branches, and complex brains adapted for perfectly navigating dizzying, three-dimensional environments. Then, our distant ancestors were suddenly, violently forced out of those shrinking trees and onto the brutal African savanna, where they faced terrifying new selective pressures. The absolute need to find scattered food in a highly challenging environment, the desperate need to cooperate in large groups just to survive, and the need to communicate incredibly complex information about scattered resources and looming dangers. Our brains expanded dramatically, almost unnaturally, over just a few million years, violently driven by a runaway feedback loop between rapidly increasing social complexity and expanding cognitive ability. This entire miraculous sequence of evolutionary events was deeply contingent on countless, almost random factors, each one absolutely necessary but utterly insufficient on its own. Primates reached the continent of Africa, but the 3 separate times they successfully reached North America, absolutely none of those isolated lineages ever evolved exceptionally large brains. Vast grasslands appeared on virtually every single continent, but only in Africa did they miraculously produce a species capable of high abstract thought. Intelligence of some rudimentary kind might be remarkably common in the wider universe, but true intelligence like ours, capable of forging technology and science and philosophy, might be vanishingly, breathtakingly rare. Our alternative, highly evolved Trudon would have undeniably been intelligent, perhaps exactly as intelligent as modern crows or dolphins or chimpanzees. They might have extensively used tools, formed incredibly complex generational societies, and faithfully passed critical knowledge from generation to generation. But the miraculous, unpredictable spark that lifted our own ancestors from being merely a clever ape to becoming a wondering philosophical human, that singular spark might absolutely never have occurred in any dinosaur lineage, regardless of time. No matter how many tens of millions of years it had to slowly evolve, the dinosaur empire could have easily produced creatures that thought, but never creatures that explicitly wondered why they thought. And yet, as the shadows lengthen across the Miocene plains, there is something almost indescribably comforting in that profound limitation. It means that in our beautiful alternative timeline, the Earth would have forever remained entirely wild, breathtakingly beautiful, and wonderfully brutal, yet utterly perfectly indifferent to the desperate human search for ultimate meaning. It would be a magnificent planet of animals, simply doing what animals do, living completely in the present moment, without anyone there to constantly judge it, to call it magnificent or terrible, or to anxiously ask whether the universe had any grand point at all. The magnificent dinosaurs would have ruled for over 230 million unbroken years, completely unchallenged, entirely unmarked by any anxious species capable of recording their existence. In that vast, silent world, there would be absolutely no one to miss us, because there would be no one to even know that we were absent. As you listen to the rhythmic breathing of these clever feathered hunters resting in the tall grass, allow that profound realization to wash over you. The heavy burden of being the universe's observer is lifted. There is only the wind, the grass, the ancient stars, and the serene perfection of a world that simply exists, asking nothing of you but to sleep and to let go of the anxious need to know why. We arrive at a threshold crossed approximately 2.5 million years ago, a critical juncture when the Earth finally surrendered to the creeping chill that had been slowly building since the Oligocene epoch. The long, relentless cooling transformed lush tropical forests into sprawling temperate woodlands, and eventually ground those woodlands down into the endless grass plains of the Miocene, finally reaching its terrifying, logical conclusion. Crushing ice sheets began to form and rapidly expand in the northern hemisphere, not just resting quietly on isolated mountain peaks, but aggressively spreading across entire continents, eventually burying vast regions like Scandinavia and Canada under kilometers of ancient frozen water. The harsh, unforgiving Pleistocene epoch had officially begun, and with it came a brutal climate regime utterly unlike anything the planet had experienced in over 250 million years. The ice did not merely advance once and stay still in silent victory. Instead, it pulsed and breathed like a massive organism, advancing violently during glacial periods that lasted roughly 100,000 years, and then temporarily retreating during interglacial periods that lasted 10,000 to 20,000 years. Before we step fully onto the freezing, wind-scoured glaciers of this radically altered world, I want to take a brief moment to welcome you back into the warmth. I am Frank, the archaeologist, and we are meticulously reconstructing the lost echoes of an Earth that simply refused to surrender its reptilian masters. I have noticed while reviewing our expedition logs that exactly 71.9% of the people who watch these speculative journeys into deep time have not yet subscribed to the channel. If you find intellectual solace and a deep grounding peace in these philosophical explorations of planetary history, please consider subscribing. It helps immensely, and it ensures we can continue our quiet excavations into the infinite possibilities of what might have been. Now, let us pull our cloaks tighter and step out onto the mammoth steppe, where the absolute rules of survival are written in ice and snow. Over the turbulent course of the Pleistocene, there were more than 20 of these violent glacial cycles, each one profoundly reshaping the planet's geography, aggressively pushing entire ecosystems toward the equator, and then allowing them to slowly rebound, forcing every living species to radically adapt or die. In our timeline, this brutal era produced the iconic megafauna of the Ice Age, massive woolly mammoths boasting shaggy coats and beautifully curved tusks, woolly rhinoceroses built like furry, unstoppable tanks, cave bears that stood an imposing 3 meters tall on their powerful hind legs, and giant ground sloths the size of modern elephants. These animals evolved specifically for glacial conditions, utilizing massive bodies to retain precious heat, thick fur or deep fat layers for crucial insulation, and the remarkable ability to survive on incredibly sparse vegetation during the long, dark winters. But in our alternative timeline, the frozen plains would have been completely devoid of mammalian giants. There would have been absolutely no mammoths, no woolly rhinoceroses, and no giant sloths. Those specific demanding niches for large, cold-adapted herbivores would have been filled by something else entirely. They would have been fiercely claimed by the dinosaurs. The profound question is whether these creatures, born of a greenhouse world, could have truly survived the biting, lethal cold of the ice ages at all. This would be their greatest, most grueling test, the ultimate challenge that would forcefully push them further from their ancestral evolutionary comfort zone than anything they had faced in their 200-million-year history. But we possess undeniable, hard scientific reasons to know they could. Remember the astonishing Prince Creek Formation in northern Alaska, where rigorous paleontology proves that diverse communities of dinosaurs lived year-round high above the Arctic Circle during the Cretaceous period. Remember that complex feathers originally evolved specifically for critical insulation, and that many dinosaur lineages were already perfectly equipped with nature's most effective cold-weather clothing. Birds, which are simply highly derived living dinosaurs, comfortably thrive in some of the most unimaginably cold environments on Earth today, from huddled penguins in the freezing gales of Antarctica to silent snowy owls hunting across the frozen Arctic tundra. The physiological adaptations strictly required for Pleistocene survival would have been undeniably significant, but they would absolutely not have required the dinosaurs to become something fundamentally different. They would merely have required them to become magnificent, exaggerated versions of what they already essentially were. Consider the incredibly resilient ceratopsians, those heavily horned herbivores that had already successfully adapted to the demanding grassland life in the warm Miocene epoch. The Pleistocene ceratopsian would have been a breathtaking creature to behold. Imagine a beast structurally similar to a classic triceratops, but profoundly transformed by 60 million years of relentless adaptation to increasingly harsh, freezing conditions. Its body would have become extraordinarily massive, perhaps 8 or 9 meters long, heavily bulked up with immense life-saving fat reserves that could reliably sustain it through the lean, desperately hungry winter months. Its iconic frill, once used primarily for visual display and delicate thermoregulation in the sweltering Mesozoic heat, would have significantly shrunk and thickened, becoming vastly more functional and far less ornamental. Covering its entire colossal body from the tip of its hardened nose to the very end of its heavy tail would have been a dense, impenetrable coat of feathery integument. This would not be the delicate plumage of a tropical bird, but the thick, intensely insulating down of a formidable animal explicitly built for survival in extreme bone-chilling cold. Picture this magnificent creature standing resolutely on a frozen Siberian steppe during a brief interglacial period, moving steadily in a vast herd of hundreds across a stark landscape of tough grass and low shrubs. It looks almost confusingly mammalian at first casual glance, possessing that characteristic shaggy coat and massive bulk. But the iconic silhouette is unmistakably dinosaurian. The heavy four-legged stance, the sharp-beaked face, the lethal horns protruding from the brow. It efficiently feeds on incredibly tough, low-growing vegetation, its highly evolved dental battery relentlessly grinding frozen plant material with an unparalleled efficiency that absolutely no mammal could ever hope to match. When the brutal winter truly comes, it will begin an epic, grueling migration south, faithfully following the retreating warmth, returning to the high north only when the deep snows finally melt and the promise of new growth tentatively appears. The successful hadrosaurs would have faced similar evolutionary pressures and likely developed comparably brilliant physiological solutions to the freezing world. Their highly sophisticated feeding apparatus, those complex dental batteries containing hundreds of constantly replacing, interlocking teeth, would have served them spectacularly well on a harsh diet of tough, unyielding Arctic vegetation. Their ancient bipedal ancestors had long since given way to heavy, robust animals that walked primarily on all fours for better stability on the treacherous ice. Most of the time, their bulky bodies were held low and wide, heavily insulated against the biting winds. In the darkest, most brutal winter months, they would have congregated by the thousands in sheltered valleys that offered some meager protection from the howling wind, closely huddling together for shared warmth in the exact same desperate way that modern musk oxen do today. And stalking these massive, shivering herds, the predators of the frozen steppes would have adapted in equally terrifying, spectacular ways. a true Pleistocene tyrannosaur, directly descended from the highly coordinated pack-hunting lineages of the Miocene plains, would have been a creature drawn straight from the darkest of nightmares. They would have been smaller than their towering Cretaceous ancestors, perhaps only 5 meters in total length, but completely covered in a remarkably thick, luxurious coat of white and pale gray feathers that rendered them nearly invisible against a snowy, clouded backdrop. They would have hunted in ruthlessly coordinated packs, taking down massive prey many times their individual size through seamless teamwork and terrifying, relentless persistence in the darkest depths of winter when easy prey was desperately scarce. It is even biologically plausible that these predators might have been able to temporarily slow their high metabolism and enter a deep torpor-like state during the worst blizzards, surviving quietly on stored body fat until the spring thaw brought new opportunities. Yet, despite the encroaching ice, not all dinosaurs would have been violently forced to adapt to the freezing cold. The immense, slow-moving glaciers did not conquer the entire globe. Some ancient lineages would have retreated to the deep tropics, successfully surviving in lush equatorial refugia, where temperatures mercifully remained incredibly mild even during the absolute peak of the glacial maxima. South America, isolated by the Central American Seaway for much of the Cenozoic, might have easily become a magnificent living repository of ancient unchanged forms. Here, the direct descendants of Cretaceous lineages that had never once needed to adapt to freezing cold or expansive grasslands were perfectly preserved within sprawling tropical forests, acting like majestic, breathing, living fossils. Southeast Asia and the humid basin of Central Africa would have served similar ecological roles, acting as vital, unbroken islands of warmth. In an increasingly frigid and hostile world, the ultimate result would have been a planet sharply divided into distinct climatic zones, far more intensely than at any time since the dinosaurs first appeared. In the deep tropics, something very much like the old sweltering Mesozoic world might have peacefully persisted, remaining warm, heavily forested, and populated by massive dinosaurs that would have looked incredibly familiar to a time-traveling visitor from the late Cretaceous. But in the vast temperate and polar regions, something entirely new and breathtaking would have emerged. These were dinosaurs profoundly transformed by 60 million years of relentless adaptation to grueling conditions, rendering them as fundamentally different from Tyrannosaurus and Triceratops as the shaggy mammoths were from their smooth tropical elephant ancestors. The brutal ice ages would have been a terrifying, unforgiving crucible, violently testing the incredible resilience of the dinosaurs more severely than anything in their entire 200-million-year history. Some fragile lineages would have inevitably failed the harsh test, sadly going extinct as the oscillating climate pushed them completely beyond their biological limits. But others would have passed it brilliantly, eventually emerging from the relentless glacial cycles, hardened, beautifully adapted, and absolutely ready for whatever challenges the indifferent cosmos presented next. As you lie in the quiet dark, envision the sheer, unbroken resilience of life against the ice. Let the profound realization that existence is a continuous, beautiful struggle for adaptation lull your restless mind into a state of deep, undisturbed serenity, far removed from the fleeting worries of our modern world. There is a fundamental rule in the intricate science of biology known as Bergmann's rule, and its underlying premise is remarkably, beautifully simple. Within a given species or evolutionary lineage, individuals tend to be significantly larger in colder, harsher climates. The profound reason for this is entirely grounded in the unforgiving laws of thermodynamics. A massively larger body inherently possesses a significantly smaller surface area to volume ratio, which dictates that it loses precious core heat much more slowly in a freezing, hostile environment. In the bitter cold, being absolutely massive is a profound, life-saving advantage. You can seamlessly retain your internal body heat far more efficiently. You can easily store vastly more fat to safely survive the incredibly lean, starving times of winter. You can simply endure, through sheer physical volume, atmospheric conditions that would instantly kill a smaller, more fragile animal. This precise mathematical rule fundamentally shaped the breathtaking megafauna of our own Pleistocene epoch. It is the exact reason why woolly mammoths were considerably larger than their tropical elephant relatives. It is why ancient cave bears absolutely dwarfed any modern brown bears that wander our forests today. The giant deer of Ireland carried antlers spanning 3.5 meters, absurdly large, almost comically oversized, but supported by a body massive enough to carry them. Cold, relentless, and indifferent, reliably makes giants in our alternative timeline. Before we gaze upon the impossible scale of these reptilian titans walking the frozen earth, I want to pause the icy winds for just a moment. I am Frank, the archaeologist, your quiet companion through the labyrinth of deep time. As we trace the immense footprints of these forgotten behemoths, I have noted that exactly 71.9% of the fellow wanderers who watch these videos have not yet subscribed to the channel. If you find comfort and intellectual liberation in these slow, sweeping journeys across an earth that never was, please consider subscribing. It helps our work immensely, ensuring we can continue to unearth the majestic secrets of the speculative past. Now, let us step back onto the frost-covered mammoth steppe and witness the true, terrifying majesty of the ice giants. The exact same thermodynamic rule would have ruthlessly applied to the ruling reptiles, and it would have produced giants of a very different, spectacular kind. The descendants of the ceratopsians, roaming the vast wind-scoured Pleistocene steppes, would have been the absolute largest members of their storied lineage since the humid days of the Cretaceous. Perhaps even larger, a full-grown adult male might have measured a staggering 10 meters from its hardened beak to the tip of its heavy tail, standing 2.5 meters at the muscular shoulder and weighing an incredible 8 or 9 tons. Its facial horns would have been noticeably shorter and thicker than those of its ancient ancestor Triceratops, vastly less elaborate, serving as brutal, highly functional weapons for defense against starving predators and violent competition for mates, rather than the ornate, fragile display structures of its tropical ancestors. Its massive body would have been distinctly barrel-shaped, densely packed with the immense fat reserves and expansive internal fermentation chambers strictly needed to process truly enormous quantities of low-quality, frozen vegetation. During the brief, incredibly intense Arctic summer, these magnificent animals would have completely gorged themselves, surviving the long, punishing winter almost entirely on stored energy. These colossal animals would have moved in massive, highly synchronized herds that literally darkened the pale horizon, not groups of dozens or hundreds, but countless thousands of individuals, forming literal rivers of flesh, bone, and thick downy feathers gracefully flowing across the seemingly endless mammoth steppe. Following the dramatic seasonal pulse of rapid vegetation growth in the summer months, they would have pushed far north into the high Arctic, relentlessly grazing on the explosion of vibrant plant life that the endless midnight daylight produced. When the bitter winter inevitably returned, they would have slowly retreated south, congregating in sheltered valleys where the snow was marginally less deep and some sparse vegetation remained physically accessible. The sheer geographic scale of these migrations would have been absolutely staggering to behold. Millions of multi-ton animals moving in perfect synchrony across thousands of kilometers of frozen tundra, constituting one of the greatest, most breathtaking wildlife spectacles the planet has ever hosted. The hadrosaurs would have shared these magnificent grasslands, their populations perhaps even larger than the ceratopsians. Their complex dental batteries gave them a profound evolutionary edge in processing the toughest vegetation, and their remarkable ability to walk on either 2 or 4 legs might have proved exceptionally useful in deep snow, where they could rear up to deeply browse on shrubs and low trees when ground-level vegetation was heavily buried. Picture a majestic Pleistocene hadrosaur, 7 meters long, its body covered in a dense coat of filamentous feathers that trapped warm air against the skin. Its duck-like bill is perfectly adapted for cropping vegetation incredibly close to the frozen ground. It moves slowly through a blinding snowstorm in a herd of several hundred. The animals are pressed tightly close together for vital warmth, their heavy breath forming thick white clouds in the frigid air. But the vast northern steppes were only one small part of the complex story. The Pleistocene world was a beautiful, complicated patchwork of drastically different environments, and each distinct region would have eventually produced its own characteristic dinosaur fauna. Beringia, the massive exposed land bridge that directly connected the continents of Asia and North America during the deepest glacial periods, would have been a vital, heavily trafficked highway for dinosaur migration, exactly just as it was for woolly mammoths and early humans in our own history. In our timeline, species that originally evolved in the frozen reaches of Asia would have freely crossed over into the Americas, and vice versa, creating a magnificently shared, deeply interconnected fauna stretching across the entire northern continents. The fearsome pack-hunting tyrannosaurs stalking the snows of Siberia would have been close genetic cousins to the feathered tyrannosaurs prowling the glaciers of Alaska, separated by only a few thousand kilometers of continuous unbroken habitat. The immense shaggy sauropods of Mongolia would have freely mingled and interbred with the cold-adapted sauropods of Wyoming. It would have been one single, unimaginably great ecosystem stretching continuously from the frost-covered plains of France all the way to the chilly peninsula of Florida, majestically united by the relentless cold. The predators of this frozen world would have been just as impressive and massive as their gargantuan prey. The highly coordinated pack-hunting tyrannosaurs we imagined in earlier chapters would have reached their absolute physical and cognitive peak in the harsh Pleistocene. Their complex social structures, refined by millions of years of grueling evolution, would have allowed them to execute hunting strategies honed to lethal perfection. A large pack of Pleistocene tyrannosaurs silently taking down a full-grown sauropod would have been a terrifying spectacle of coordinated, intelligent violence. Some agile individuals aggressively driving the panicked prey, others systematically cutting off all escape routes, while still others waited patiently in perfectly concealed ambushes. The whole terrifying group working seamlessly together with a deadly precision that spoke volumes to generations of deeply learned behavior, faithfully passed from parents to offspring. Smaller predators would have filled other ecological niches. The dromaeosaurid feathered pursuit hunters would have been incredibly common on the open steppes, hunting in large packs that could easily number in the dozens, tirelessly taking down mid-sized prey through sheer persistence. Solitary hunters might have stalked the dark forest edges, silently ambushing naive prey from dense cover, and the troodontids, those large-brained, tool-using hunters we imagined earlier, might have become the most versatile predators of all, highly capable of taking a wide range of prey through a brilliant combination of intelligence, cooperation, and adaptability. But the breathtaking adaptations of the Pleistocene were absolutely not strictly limited to the solid Earth. The freezing seas would have hosted their own magnificent cold-adapted fauna. The ancient Mosasaur and Plesiosaur lineages, by now beautifully diversified into dozens of highly specialized species, would fill every conceivable marine niche, from shallow coastal fish eaters to deep open ocean giants that would have gracefully navigated the exact same frigid waters that supported great whales and seals in our timeline. Some of these ancient marine reptiles might have developed incredibly thick, insulating layers of rich blubber, remarkably converging on the highly successful body plans of marine mammals. Others might have become highly efficient seasonal migrants, tirelessly following massive schools of prey species back and forth between the warm tropical and the bitter temperate waters. The absolute largest descendants of the great marine reptiles of the Mesozoic era might have easily rivaled the blue whale in sheer physical size, becoming peaceful filter feeders that strained billions of tiny krill and small fish from the highly productive polar seas. The glacial cycles would have created a massive planetary rhythm of expansion and contraction, of violent extinction and beautiful speciation, of constant adaptation and readaptation. Each freezing advance of the ice would have aggressively pushed species toward the equator, violently fragmenting large populations and creating profound opportunities for evolutionary divergence. Each subsequent retreat of the ice would have allowed the triumphant recolonization of newly available habitat, bringing previously separated populations back into direct contact over the course of 2 million turbulent years. This relentless oscillating pulse would have driven the engine of evolution at an incredibly accelerated pace, brilliantly producing deep diversity and extreme specialization at rates rarely seen in Earth's entire history. The brutal ice ages did not destroy the dinosaurs of our alternative timeline. They magnificently transformed them. They forcefully pushed them to evolve brilliant physiological solutions to brutal problems their tropical ancestors had never faced, to rapidly develop massive bodies and complex behaviors perfectly suited to conditions that would have been completely unimaginable in the warm, humid Cretaceous world where their storied lineage first began. The breathtaking giants of the frozen world were the grand culmination of 230 million years of unbroken dinosaur evolution. They were not the tragic end of a story, but merely the latest, most spectacular chapter in an ongoing, magnificent saga. And then, just as suddenly as it had arrived in geological terms, the current interglacial period finally began. The massive ice slowly retreated, global temperatures gently rose, the sprawling mammoth steppe gave way to dense temperate forest and sprawling tundra, and the world that majestically emerged. The world of the present day would have been profoundly shaped by 66 million years of history. That history never happened in our timeline, leaving a world still ruled entirely by dinosaurs. As you lie back and close your eyes against the cold, allow the immense, unyielding resilience of life to wash over your consciousness. Let the deep tectonic breathing of the earth soothe your mind, knowing that the planet always finds a way to endure. Sleep now, surrounded by the ghosts of a magnificent empire that never fell. The current interglacial epoch finally began its slow, warming ascent, gently pushing back the glaciers that had gripped the planet for 100,000 years. The towering ice sheets retreated, global temperatures steadily rose, and the endless mammoth steppe gracefully gave way to dense temperate forests and sprawling tundra. The world that emerged from the frost, the alternative world of the present day, would have been profoundly shaped by 66 million years of an unbroken history that never happened in our timeline. Stand on a wind-swept hilltop in our alternative present and look out across the landscape. The fundamental geography is entirely familiar. You would recognize the same towering mountain ranges, the same winding rivers, and the same rugged coastlines that define our modern world. Before we cross into the sprawling savannas and dense jungles of this alternative present, I want to quietly introduce myself to those who have just joined our journey. I am Frank, the archaeologist, and we are mapping the intricate biology of a reality that exists only in the shadows of probability. I have observed that exactly 71.9% of the brilliant minds who listen to these deep-time meditations have not yet subscribed. If you find true peace and intellectual wonder in these visions of an unbroken earth, please consider subscribing. It helps immensely and allows us to continue painting these grand landscapes of the speculative past. Now, let us gaze upon the map of the present day, where borders are drawn not by human nations, but by ancient, shifting ecosystems. Continental drift operates on agonizingly slow timescales of mere centimeters per year, and 66 million years is not enough time to drastically rearrange the continents. Africa still presses heavily against Europe, creating the Mediterranean basin. India has collided with Asia, raising the Himalayas high into the thin atmosphere. The Americas stretch unbroken from pole to pole, connected by the narrow isthmus of Central America. The map is exactly the same map you learned in school, but the animals breathing upon that map are completely different. Let us take a contemplative tour of this alternative Earth, continent by continent, ecosystem by ecosystem. Start in Africa, on the golden savannas of the East African Rift, where in our timeline you would find the greatest concentration of large mammals on Earth. The exact same geological forces that created the modern Serengeti exist in our alternative timeline. The rich volcanic soils, the identical seasonal rainfall patterns, the same endless grasslands stretch into the curving horizon. But instead of wandering wildebeest and striped zebra, you would see herds of highly derived ceratopsians. Their horned heads bob rhythmically as they graze, their massive bodies covered in sparse, bristly, feathery integument, perfectly adapted to dissipate the intense tropical heat. Some of these grazing species would be massive, easily the size of African elephants, flawlessly filling the mega herbivore niche. Others would be considerably smaller, lighter, and vastly faster, living in anxious herds of thousands that rely entirely on vigilance and numbers for protection. The apex predators would be functionally familiar, even if their physical forms were utterly alien. Lethal packs of medium-sized feathered theropods, direct descendants of the ancient tyrannosaur or dromaeosaur lineages, would tirelessly patrol the edges of the grazing herds, carefully looking for the weak, the young, or the isolated. Their coordinated hunting strategies would be terrifyingly sophisticated, honed by tens of millions of years of relentless coevolution with their agile prey. The skies above this vibrant savanna would be filled with magnificent pterosaurs. These are not the lumbering giants of the Cretaceous, but smaller, adapted species perfectly filling the ecological niches securely occupied by vultures and eagles in our timeline. And true birds would be there too, of course, peacefully sharing the boundless sky with their ancient pterosaur cousins in a world where both groups had the extended time to successfully diversify. Across the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, in the humid embrace of South America, you would find something entirely different. South America spent much of the Cenozoic era isolated from all other continents. In our alternative timeline, that prolonged isolation would have produced uniquely spectacular dinosaurs. Perhaps the great long-necked sauropods would have peacefully persisted here, their ancient forms still gracefully browsing in the incredibly dense canopies of the Amazon basin, representing an ancient body plan perfectly preserved in a continental home. Australia would be stranger still in this unbroken timeline. In our alternative timeline, Australia would have been violently severed from Antarctica roughly 45 million years ago, taking with it whatever specific dinosaur fauna happened to be present at the moment of separation. Those maroon dinosaurs would have evolved in complete, splendid isolation ever since, inevitably producing forms as delightfully unique and scientifically unexpected as the hopping kangaroo and the venomous platypus are to us today. The massive northern continents, Eurasia and North America, would be completely dominated by the incredibly diverse grassland fauna we have been tracing throughout this journey. Breathtaking herds of ceratopsians and hadrosaurs grazing in numbers that defy human comprehension, pack-hunting tyrannosaurs and agile dromaeosaurs executing highly coordinated strikes, and the global oceans would remain the undisputed realm of the great marine reptiles. The mosasaurs and plesiosaurs, by now heavily diversified into hundreds of highly specialized species, would completely fill every conceivable marine niche from shallow, sunlit coral reefs to the crushing blackness of the open ocean. The absolute largest of these majestic descendants might easily rival the blue whale in sheer impossible size, measuring 30 meters long and weighing an astonishing 150 tons, the biggest individual animals ever to live on the planet. What you would not see anywhere on this vibrant alternative Earth is a single human being. There would be no towering cities made of glass and concrete polluting the pristine horizon, no asphalt roads violently cutting across the endless grasslands, no massive cargo ships polluting the quiet oceans or roaring aircraft tearing through the peaceful skies. There would be no sprawling farms, no barbed wire fences dividing the land, and absolutely no domesticated animals blindly following human commands. The world would be fiercely, breathtakingly wild in a way that our own world has not been wild for over 10,000 years. This complete absence of humanity would change absolutely everything about how the planetary biosphere functioned. Without human hunters to decimate them, the magnificent megafauna would be far more abundant than anything we can observe in our timeline. The ceratopsian herds of the African savanna might easily number in the tens of millions, creating a combined terrestrial biomass far exceeding anything we have ever witnessed in the mammalian world. Without humans to violently fragment natural habitats, complex ecosystems would be perfectly continuous across entire continents, allowing natural migrations on massive scales entirely impossible in our heavily developed world. The planet's atmospheric chemistry would be beautifully, naturally different. There would be no ancient fossil fuels violently burned, no unnatural carbon dioxide pumped relentlessly into the delicate atmosphere. No artificial global warming threatening to destabilize the global climate. The alternative Earth of the present day would still be firmly in the natural rhythmic grip of the Pleistocene Ice Age cycle, slowly heading toward another glacial maximum in a few thousand years, its ancient climate controlled entirely by the celestial laws of orbital mechanics and the deep volcanic activity of the Earth itself. Looking closely at this magnificent, unspoiled world, you might naturally ask yourself, is it somehow better than ours? Is a wild planet ruled by dinosaurs inherently superior to a developed world ruled by human beings? The question does not really have a definitive answer. Better for whom? The planet itself simply does not care. It is just a massive ball of molten rock, liquid water, and swirling air, utterly indifferent to what specific kinds of biological organisms happen to be crawling across its cooling surface. But there is something incredibly profound to be said for a beautiful world that has been ecologically stable for over 230 million years. A pristine world where no single hyper-intelligent species has violently reshaped the entire biosphere merely to suit its own immediate needs. A harmonious world where the slow, majestic engine of evolution proceeds at its own natural, unhurried pace, driven entirely by shifting climate, natural competition, and pure chance. There is a deep, resonant purity to such a world, even if there is absolutely no one there to consciously appreciate it. The dinosaurs did not explicitly choose to rule the earth. They simply evolved beautifully to fit the specific conditions they found, and then they kept evolving as those conditions naturally changed. In our timeline, a random rock from space violently ended their reign. In our alternative timeline, nothing ever did. The world today belongs entirely to them, just as it has for 230 million unbroken years. And there is no one there to say otherwise. Let the vast, beautiful indifference of the natural world wash over your tired mind, bringing a deep, absolute serenity that only comes from knowing that the universe does not need us to function perfectly. Sleep now, knowing the earth is capable of holding infinite beautiful possibilities in the quiet dark. We have spent this entire sprawling documentary meticulously talking about dinosaurs, what they would have become, how they would have brilliantly adapted, and what magnificent forms they would have evolved to fill the complex ecological niches of the modern world. But there is a profound, lingering question we have not yet addressed directly. A vital question that might have been quietly nagging at the very back of your mind since the absolute beginning of our speculative journey. What happened to the mammals in this alternative timeline? In our actual history, the catastrophic extinction of the dinosaurs was the ultimate, unparalleled opportunity for our distant mammalian ancestors. For 150 million years, they had lived entirely in the dangerous margins, small, mostly nocturnal, completely relegated to the ecological shadows that the ruling dinosaurs either did not want or simply could not fill. Then the asteroid hit, the dinosaurs died, and suddenly the entire world was terrifyingly empty. The surviving mammals exploded into that vast echoing emptiness, rapidly diversifying into every newly available niche, aggressively evolving into forms that ranged from tiny nervous shrews to giant filter-feeding whales. Within just 10 million years of the extinction, they had effectively conquered the planet. But in our alternative timeline, that golden catastrophic opportunity simply never came. The dinosaurs survived, the asteroid missed, and the mammals permanently remained in the deep shadows. But evolutionary shadows are absolutely not nothing. The mammals would not have gone extinct. They would simply have remained what they had successfully been for the previous 150 million years, small, incredibly secretive, and highly successful in their own very limited way. And over 66 million years of continued, relentless evolution under the heavy feet of the dinosaurs, they would have continuously diversified within those strict constraints, perfectly filling every tiny niche that the massive dinosaurs could not reach. Before we descend into these hidden, shadowy realms to uncover the fate of our distant cousins, I want to take one final gentle moment to welcome you. I am Frank, the archaeologist, and we are nearing the end of our grand meditation on the fragility of our own existence. I have noted with interest that exactly 71.9% of the dedicated dreamers who join me on these deep time expeditions have not yet subscribed to the channel. If you find true peace, profound intellectual stimulation, and a deep sense of calm in these visions of an unbroken earth, please consider subscribing. It helps our work immensely, ensuring we can continue to unearth the majestic speculative secrets of the deep past. Now, let us peer into the darkness where the mammals are quietly waiting. The deep night would have forever belonged to them. Dinosaurs, for all their staggering diversity and breathtaking adaptations, were almost certainly diurnal, primarily active during the sunlit day and resting deeply at night. The fossil evidence strongly suggests that early mammals specifically evolved their warm-blooded metabolism and enhanced senses of smell and hearing exactly to exploit the vast nocturnal niche, hunting insects and desperately avoiding visual dinosaur predators under the comforting cloak of darkness. In our alternative timeline, that dark starlit niche would have remained exclusively theirs. The dense forests of the modern alternative world would truly come alive only after sunset, with millions of small, furry creatures cautiously hunting and foraging, living their entire complex lives in the quiet hours between dusk and dawn. The expansive underground would have entirely belonged to them too. Burrowing is a highly effective survival strategy that heavily favors very small bodies. The metabolic energy strictly required to dig through packed earth increases rapidly with sheer size, and mammals had been successfully burrowing since the early Mesozoic era. In our alternative timeline, an entire complex ecosystem might quietly exist entirely beneath the heavy feet of the grazing dinosaurs. Vast networks of dark tunnels and hidden chambers occupied by hundreds of mammal species that rarely or absolutely never venture up to the sunlit surface. These subterranean mammals might have evolved remarkable specialized adaptations, incredibly enhanced hearing to perfectly navigate in absolute darkness, exquisitely sensitive whiskers to physically feel their way through winding tunnels, or even complete permanent blindness. They would be entirely invisible to the magnificent dinosaurs walking above them, a completely hidden, parallel world that the towering rulers of the surface would never even know existed. But here is a truly fascinating twist in the evolutionary tale. The highly adaptable mammals might have found spectacular success in one vast alien realm that the dinosaurs never fully conquered, the deep, crushing open ocean. In our timeline, magnificent whales and dolphins evolved from small land-dwelling mammals that slowly returned to the sea roughly 50 million years ago. In our alternative timeline, the sunlit surface niches would have been firmly occupied by the mosasaurs and plesiosaurs, but the great marine reptiles were strictly air breathers deeply tied to the surface, fundamentally limited in exactly how deep they could safely dive and how long they could stay submerged. A highly specialized mammal lineage that evolved specifically for extreme deep diving, gradually developing the incredible breath-holding capacity and immense pressure tolerance of modern sperm whales, might have been able to successfully exploit deep-sea resources that the marine reptiles simply could not ever reach. The deep sea, that unimaginably vast Frisian realm of absolute darkness miles below the sunlit surface, might have slowly become an entirely mammalian domain. Picture a beautiful, strange creature gliding silently through the freezing waters of the alternative present, a mammal, incredibly warm-blooded, directly descended from some small, furry ancestor that bravely took to the sea while the giant dinosaurs entirely ruled the land. It is perhaps the size of a modern dolphin, beautifully streamlined for rapid swimming, its original limbs transformed into highly efficient flippers, its warm body heavily insulated by a thick layer of blubber. It hunts efficiently in the deep scattering layer, hundreds of meters below the waves, diving for 30 minutes or more on a single massive breath, using sophisticated biological echolocation to perfectly find evasive prey in the absolute, crushing darkness. Here is a remarkably strange, beautiful thought to sit with as the night deepens around you. If you are quietly listening to this, if you are actively hearing these specific words and comprehending them, then the asteroid absolutely hit. That is the magnificent, unavoidable paradox resting at the very heart of this thought experiment. The act of imagining a pristine world where the dinosaurs survived strictly requires a highly developed mind capable of abstract imagination. And that specific mind, your mind, exists only because the dinosaurs violently died. Human intelligence is not some inevitable predetermined endpoint of planetary evolution. It is a profound contingency, a beautiful accident, the incredibly improbable result of a chaotic sequence of events that began with a burning rock from space violently striking the shallow waters of the Yucatan Peninsula exactly 66 million years ago. If the asteroid had missed, there would be no one here to wonder what might have been. The profound absence of human-style intelligence does not make the alternative world somehow lesser. It does not make it worse or emptier or less meaningful. It merely makes it completely different. And different is absolutely not the same as inferior. That world would not ever need us to appreciate it. It would not need a conscious, anxious observer to forcefully give it meaning. It would simply be, exactly as our own world simply is, a planet completely covered with living things, each one perfectly adapted to its niche. The asteroid hit, the dinosaurs died, and here you are, exactly 66 million years later, resting quietly and listening to a story about a world that never was. But as you drift slowly toward a deep restorative sleep, maybe you can easily imagine it. The warm, comforting darkness of a Mesozoic night, the soft sounds of ancient creatures moving peacefully through the dense forest, the brilliant stars wheeling slowly overhead, the exact same stars that shine in our sky tonight, the same glowing moon, the same slow, majestic dance of the cosmos that does not care what walks below it. In that alternative world, something is peacefully sleeping, some magnificent descendant of the dinosaurs curled warmly in its nest or standing quiet watch over its resting herd, its eyes closed, its breath slowing, its mind dimming toward absolute rest. Two completely different worlds, two diverging timelines, yet the exact same peaceful night falling gently over both of them. The dinosaurs never anxiously asked why they existed. They simply lived, and they simply rested. Allow yourself to do the exact same. Release the burden of your thoughts into the vast, indifferent beauty of deep time, and sleep.